Resuming debate, the honourable member for Cypress Hills Grasslands.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I'm glad to be here today, be able to talk about M-103. My colleague and I served together on the Subcommittee on Human Rights, and I respect her commitment to these issues. We disagree on some points of her motion. For those of us, Mr. Speaker, who've worked on issues of religious freedom, there is nothing worse than to hear of a faith community attacked simply because of who they are and because of the faith that they hold. And this is much too common around the world. We were reminded that we are not immune when we heard of the massacre in Quebec City, the killing of people as they were praying. Mr. Speaker, I come to this discussion as a person of faith. Like so many other Canadians, my faith informs my life at every point. I know there are millions of Canadians of many different faith groups who live more confidently because of their faith, but that does not always mean that we are always understood by the culture around us. Holding to a faith perspective often puts people at odds with the world around us. To hold a different perspective from our neighbour is to run the risk of being misunderstood. But we live in a country made up of people from around the globe, from over 150 different cultures and histories and beliefs. And in the past, we have bridged those gaps. This has been done by insisting that each person has the right to believe or not believe as he or she chooses without coercion. They have the right to live out those beliefs, and they have the right, and I would argue, Mr. Speaker, the obligation to communicate those beliefs. The right to religious freedom and belief and the freedom of speech go hand in hand. When we find language that clarifies our perspective for others, then we stand a chance at being understood and our issues being explainable to those who hold a different viewpoint. That's how we come to an understanding and an acceptance of the fact that others can hold very different beliefs than we do. Mr. Speaker, when we understand these differences, they are no longer threatening to us, but actually complement what we are as a nation. In this country, we have over 1 million Muslims who are part of the Canadian fabric. They've been here for decades. The generations have lived in Canadian society. Many live alongside their neighbours who perhaps don't even know that they are Muslim. First of all, they are neighbours, and then they are friends. The last few years, the events in the Middle East and around the world, including here in Canada, have put a new focus on Islam. One thing that's obvious is that not all Muslims, and indeed not every Muslim in Canada, hold the same views. And when people see what is going on around the globe, they want to know more. They want to hear more information. They want explanations. This is where we find ourselves, Mr. Speaker. The radical few are making a lot of trouble for everyone else. They've been successful in creating an atmosphere where both Muslims and non-Muslims are uncomfortable and fearful. And as a country, we need to find long-term solutions to those divisions. But to find solutions, Mr. Speaker, we need clarity. We need to be able to talk clearly. And so that leads us to today and to M-103. Highlighting one religion in particular, but without clear language on what that means. It's unfortunate that this motion does not encourage conversation because the content of the motion, the focus is on one term, which is Islamophobia. This is a word we see often, but one which many people are uncomfortable with because they do not know what it includes. In M-103, Islamophobia has been left undefined. People don't know what it means in this motion. It's not good enough, as the mover suggested yesterday, that this should go to committee and then it can be defined there. It was her responsibility, or the responsibility of the PMO when they wrote this motion, to define it if their intention was other than to play some sort of political game with it. In M-103, no one knows how it is defined because we do not know what the mover intended. She tried to lay a little bit of a definition out for us tonight, but it's unfortunate, it's not surprising, because there is in fact no consensus on the meaning of the word. In 103, is it so inclusive that it covers any and all criticism of Islam? There are many in the radical community who are trying to use this phrase as a catch-all. Does it allow at M-103 for the asking of difficult questions? It sounds silly, but I've been in seminars where people were told they did not have the right to ask probing questions because that would mean that they were defining another religion in some way. In Islamophobia in M-103, is it only referring to the extreme hatred that we see as mosques are desecrated and people are killed? If that is the definitions, Canadians can clearly understand that. But because of the lack of a definition, this term can be applied differently dependent on the priority of the user. Some apply the term only to serious acts of hostility, while others apply it to every critique and every act against Islam. Canadians have been confused by this, and they have been contacting all of our offices. And I know every member in this Parliament has heard from our constituents. They are asking questions like, is the term meant to inform us, or is it meant to intimidate us? Does it encourage free speech, or is it shutting it down? And, Mr. Speaker, we can't answer those questions because we don't know what is meant in the motion. So, Mr. Speaker, this word is a conversation stopper and it needs to be set aside. Don't we do a disservice to actual victims and their families when we describe what happened to them with the same word that we use to describe insulting language? Those attacks are not on the same level. Let's not describe them that way. As Conservatives, we have focused on these issues for years. That is why we established the Office of Religious Freedom to protect religious expression around the world. It was working well until this government shut it down. We wanted to make this motion work, Mr. Speaker. We went to the member opposite and suggested amendments. A simple change to amend it to say hatred against Muslims rather than Islamophobia would have made it much clearer. Everyone can understand that. They know what those terms mean. And we did that so that this motion could be supported unanimously if possible, but it was refused by the member or by the PMO. Why not change it when it would easily describe what we're trying to address? Wouldn't that have allowed us to have a mature debate here? The mover, who should want this more than any of us, refused our suggestions, and so we are stuck with this version. We're stuck with a divisive term, Mr. Speaker, that means nothing or everything, which is not clearly defined, and it is of little value in the debate about the role of Islam in Canada. And that is unfortunate because this motion could have set a new direction. It could have set us on a path to talking together, to walking together, to working together. And, Mr. Speaker, perhaps it would have been easier to pretend it all is well and say nothing other than we oppose Islamophobia, but that leaves too many things unresolved, especially around the issues of free speech. And this has a lot of people concerned, Mr. Speaker. We're hearing from people across the spectrum. Moderate Muslims are left without the kind of comfort they need to have. The Canadian public that is interested in this issue has no safe place to take their questions and their concerns. They're getting reluctant to ask questions publicly because they do not know what they will be accused of. This is not healthy for our country. It's time we begin to talk about these issues in much more mature terms. Now, Mr. Speaker, if the Liberals are using Islamophobia as a political football here, they are not serving Canadians well. While they may be thinking they're going to get some sort of short-term political gain in passing this motion, the reality is this is not addressing the issue at a level necessary to deal with Canadians' concerns. We need to have an open conversation in this country in order to support and promote the right of people of faith to live safely. To do that, we need to have the freedom to speak clearly, openly, and in well-defined terms. The road to stress and persecution comes through the failure to communicate and identify and protect safe spaces to have these discussions. The debate tonight and the one tomorrow give us the opportunity to rise above cliches, to engage in a real debate about the future of religious freedom, free speech, and the place of religious communities in that conversation. Now, Mr. Speaker, this is not just theoretical. I have worked with MPs from around the world on these issues. I have a friend, a Muslim MP, who is a moderate in a modern democratic country. He's using his voice in his country to speak to these issues of what Islam is and is not. Because of his courage, he's under constant threat, under police protection, because radicals do not want him speaking. To them, he is an Islamophobe. To his constituents, he is speaking on the issues of religious freedom and free speech. Let's elevate this debate so that we can begin to deal with these issues in Canada maturely. If we don't, we will pay a heavy price in division and conflict. We have the opportunity to avoid that, so let's do it. Otherwise, we will be allowing a small group of ideologues who are trying to cause trouble around the globe and a small group of people in our country who hate for no reason to have their way, to drive a wedge between moderate Muslims and the Canadian public, both of whom reject the hatred that we saw 2 weeks ago.